So the first thing we looked at was birth weight. Clearly, this is not the first time this has been observed. Animals that are under heat stress typically deliver calves at a lower weight. Part of that is the fact that they don't spend as much time in utero. Part of it is, I think some of those differences that we see in calf, in delivery of nutrients, in exchange of gases, other things, just a less effective sort of support for development of that calf in general. So one area that really hadn't been looked at was the impact on early life immune status in these animals. So what I represented here are circulating immunoglobulin concentrations in calves in the solid line up top. Those are calves that were born to a cooled dam, and compared that through the first month of life with calves that were born in the dashed line to a heat stress dam. So from the first day of life, those animals that were born to a heat stress dam, lower circulating IgG versus those that were born to a cool dam. So this comes into the question, what's happening to colostrum quality from an Ig standpoint? Concentrations are not different, and we've seen that in multiple studies now. We just don't see differences in Ig concentration. We do see differences in the total volume of colostrum produced. That's an indication that there's a difference in the apparent efficiency of absorption of immunoglobulin that animal's exposed to. And that's what that inset is, right? Showing the reduction in apparent efficiency of absorption. So we went on to do another study to try and tease out, are these effects on the calf itself, or are these the effects on colostrum? So set up our sort of normal model, calves born to heat stress cows, calves born to cooled cows, and instead of getting their dam's colostrum, they got good quality colostrum from a pool that we created. So they're all getting colostrum from the same source. Looking at growth in those animals in the first experiment, just as we would have anticipated, the animals born to a heat stress dam, lower birth weight and lower weaning weight relative to the animals that were born to a cool dam. So some of the first indications that there are going to be long-term effects of growth on these animals with in utero heat stress. We also started to get some indication of differences in sort of body composition. We think about height being an indicator of a leaner animal. We see that the calves from the cool dams actually taller through weaning than the animals born to the heat stress dams. Also looked at calf survival, and primarily what we were looking at here is the animals the heifers that left the herd before puberty, mostly due to sickness. A lot more of them left before puberty if they were in the heat stress group versus those that were in the cool group. And so a lot fewer animals made it through the first lactation if they were in that heat stress group. Animals that were born to a cool dam improved reproductive performance versus those that were born to a heat stress dam. This AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, is produced by follicles. We're going to see that the amount of AMH that's in circulation is an indicator of follicular reserve, the number of follicles. Female mammals are born with all of the follicles they're ever going to ovulate, right? So if we see differences in AMH, it's been an indication of differences in reproductive potential. And so here, the animals in the blue line were those that were from a cool dam. You see that, they have greater reproductive potential from an AMH perspective. As easy an illustration as can be, we just look at gonadal development in these two groups of animals. That top panel in the blue, that's the ovary from a calf that was born to a cool dam at the time slaughter at weaning. And the bottom sort of red grid is the ovary from an animal that was born to a heat stress dam. The grids are the same size, yet there's dramatic differences in gonadal development. So of course the other reproductive organ that we're interested in is the mammary gland. And similarly, we see a reduction in mammary development with in utero heat stress. It's pretty visible even at birth. Those are those panels A and B, right? You see a reduction in that parenchyma tissue, which is eventually going to be the secretory tissue of the mammary gland. It's even more apparent at the time the animals are weaned. This is kind of the gross level, structural level of the mammary gland. We look at the cellular level, it's even more apparent. There is less potential for mammary development in the animals that are born to a heat stress dam relative to those that are born to a cooled dam. And that's probably part of the explanation for these data. So these are the first lactation yields of heifers that 2 years earlier in the open symbols experienced heat stress in utero compared with her herd mates in the solid symbols that 2 years earlier were from a cooled dam. All the animals are cooled during lactation. They're all fed the same. They're all calving at the same time. No difference in genetic potential between these two groups. The only difference between these two groups of animals is what they experienced in utero. And there's a 3.5 liter drag a day with in utero heat stress in that first lactation. So that's suggesting that we have created a phenotype here, which is going to be a lower productivity phenotype for the life of that animal. And we've now gone on and doubled or more than doubled the sort of number of records that went into our subsequent analysis. And when we look at it, it's about 2 liters a day in that first lactation, similar, closer to 2.5 liters a day in the second lactation. And it just gets a wider difference as the animals mature. So in that, we've gone through 3 lactations now, looked at this, and those animals are not catching up. If she was heat stressed in utero, she is programmed for poorer productivity for life relative to her herd mates that were born to a cooled dam. And perhaps not surprisingly, we see a reduction in survival in the herd. Right? So we tracked them through essentially 5 years of age, trying to get to 3 lactations. And what we see is in the orange line are the animals that were born to a heat stress dam. Blue line are the animals that were born to a cool dam. Heat stress in utero reduces life in the herd by about a year's time. And perhaps the bigger problem is that pattern persists in their offspring. So the panel B are the granddaughters of those dams that were heat stressed during late gestation or cooled. These didn't experience heat stress or cooling when they were in utero. It's just this is what their moms passed on to them. And if you remember, all of these calves in panel A were born having experienced heat stress or cooling in utero. They were born with all the follicles they're ever going to have. So, these F2 animals were actually also heat stressed. They were just heat stressed as, germ cells rather than as developing fetuses. So, transgenerational programming within utero heat stress. Looking at these granddaughters beyond the survival, those animals, when they've done a sort of a non-invasive look at mammary development using ultrasound, they see that there are similar reductions in those animals as well. At the sort of cellular level, those animals have lower potential from a mammary growth standpoint if their grandmother was heat stressed late in gestation.